Hello friends, my name is Ramasu. Today we shall discuss about a topic that what is kernel. Friend, today's topic is very interesting, especially if you have interest in software and technology. So let's just start, friend. First of all, I would request to please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell option as well so that my videos can reach to you. Friend, the kernel is the essential center of a computer operating system OS. It is the core that provides basic services for all other parts of the operating system. It is the main layer between the operating system and hardware, and it helps with process and memory management, file system, device controlling, and networking. A kernel is often constrained with a shell, which is the outermost part of the operating system that interacts with user commands. Kernel and shell are terms used more frequently in Unix operating OS X than in IBM mainframe or Microsoft Windows system. A kernel is not to be confused with basic input-output system BIOS, which is an independent program stored on a chip within a computer circuit board. Typically, a kernel includes an interrupt handler that carries not all request or completed input-output operations that compete for the kernel's services, a scheduler that determines which program share the kernel's processing time and in what order, and a supervisor that actually gives use of the computer to each process when it is scheduled. A kernel might also include a manager for the OS address spaces in memory or storage. The manager shares the address spaces among all components and other users of the kernel's services. Other parts of the OS as well as application programs request a kernel's services through a set of program interfaces known as system calls. Now the device drivers. Device drivers help kernels execute actions. Device drivers are pieces of code that correspond to each device and execute when devices connect to the operating system or hardware through a USB or software download. Device drivers help close the gap between user applications and hardware as well as streamline the code's inner workings. To ensure proper functionality, the kernel must have a device driver embedded for every peripheral present in the system. There are several types of device drivers. Each addresses different data transfer types, like character device driver implement open, close, read and write data, as well as grant data stream access for the user space. Block device drivers provide device access for hardware that transfers randomly accessible data in fixed blocks. Network device drivers transmit data packets for hardware interfaces that connect to external systems. Because the operating system needs the code that makes up the kernel continuously, the code is usually loaded into computer storage in an area that is protected so that it will not be overlaid with less frequently used parts of the operating system. Now the types of the kernel. The Linux kernel is constantly growing with 20 million lines of code in 2018. From a foundational level, this kernel is layered into a variety of subsystems. These main groups include a system call interface, process management, network slack, memory management, virtual file system, ARC, and device drivers. Administrators can port the Linux kernel into their OS and run live updates. These features, along with the fact that Linux is open source, make it more suitable for server systems or environments that require real-time maintenance. Beyond Linux, Apple developed the XNU OS kernel in 1996 as a hybrid of the Mac and the BSD kernels and paired it with the Objective-C Application Programming Interface (API). Because it is a combination of the monolithic kernel and microkernel, it has increased modularity and parts of the operating system again memory protection here. Now, the difference between the monolithic monokernel and the microkernels. Friend, kernels fall into two main architectures, monolithic and microkernel. The main difference between these types is the number of address spaces they support. A microkernel delegates user services and kernel services in different address spaces, whereas monolithic kernels implement services in the same address space. The microkernel has all of its services in the kernel address space. The monolithic kernel is larger because it houses both kernel and user services in the same address space. Communication protocol also differs between the two, with monolithic kernels using a faster system call to execute processes between the hardware and software. Microkernels use message passing, which sends data packets, signals, and functions to the correct processes. Microkernels provide greater flexibility to add a new service. Admins can modify the user address space. Monolithic kernels require more work because admins must reconstruct the entire kernel to support the new service. Because of their isolated nature, microkernels are more secure and remain unaffected if one service within the address space fails. Monolithic kernels pose a greater security risk to system because if a system fails, then the entire system shuts down. Monolithic kernels don't require as much source code as a microkernel, which means they are less susceptible to bugs. Overall, these kernel implementations present a trade-off. Either admins can get the flexibility of more source code or increased security without customization options. A kernel is a computer program that is the heart and core of an operating system. Since the operating system has control over the system, so the kernel also has control over everything in the system. It is the most important part of an operating system. Whenever a system starts, the kernel is the first program that is loaded after the bootloader because the kernel has to handle the rest of the things of the system for the operating system. The kernel remains in the memory until the operating system is shut down. So friend, thanks a lot for watching the video. I hope you like this video. If you like it, please share it with the friends and colleagues, and thanks a lot for watching the video.